we had an election a week and a half ago,
Right.
and the Liberals and Mark Carney won. They didn't get a majority. They got a minority, but a strong minority. Where does that leave us now? What did you think of the elections?
Well, I can hardly believe it was just a week and a half ago, because it seems like a lot longer than that. But I was quite pleased. I felt like we dodged a bullet. We were heading into an election, obviously, late last year, that would have left us with a conservative government. And we don't have that. So that's a positive. I see a lot of issues coming out of it. One interesting thing was that the Conservatives held their vote and increased it up to 42% or close to 42%. And if you look at what they've traditionally gotten, or the last couple of elections, that's basically the 35% of the country that seems to be stuck on them, plus maybe they had about 5% of the People's Party vote that went back to them. In the 2021 election, People's Party got approximately 5%, and they got less than 1% this time. So that all went to Pierre Poilievre, and so that's a very strong voting bloc.
There was not a collapse of the Conservative Party by any means. Compared to where the polls were in December, yes, they lost a lot of ground. However, compared to past elections, they came through with strong vote numbers. Ontario prevented a Liberal majority, to tell you the truth, the way they voted.
Yeah, the other pundits I've been listening to blame that on the fact that Carney stopped talking about Trump for the last 2 weeks of the election and released a sort of a vanilla-flavored platform, and then the Conservatives started running ads with no Pierre Poilievre.
Without Pierre Poilievre.
And they're saying that's when the numbers went up in Ontario.
And Pierre Poilievre went through a whole campaign to rebrand himself, to make himself likable, to smile more,
Right.
to be not as threatening, not as attacking. He had trouble hiding it, but he did do that. And the polls in that last week started to reflect that. Canadians were less afraid of him than they had been previously. And I think that came through.
Yeah, I think it's more that I don't think they really saw a change in Pierre. I think they just dropped him out of the picture, and I think that's what helped. As soon as they removed him from the equation, people were saying that they wanted to vote Conservative, but they didn't like Pierre Poilievre, and they said actually much less polite things than that. But I think that he showed that he has a very solid part of the country behind him, and the Carney coalition, let's call it that for lack of a better word, is, in my opinion, less stable than the Poilievre coalition at this point in time.
I don't want to jump around too much, but did you hear Poilievre yesterday talking about the Carney visit with Trump?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
What did he have to say?
Pierre Poilievre was stopped, and two things were notable about it. Number one, he let the media stop him, and he had a scrum with the media. No single microphone, no controlling who asked questions. He just stood there with a group of reporters answering questions, which he refused to do during the whole election campaign. He did it at the Parliament Hill.
Well, he refused to do it for the last 2 years since he became leader, basically.
They did it yesterday. Okay, so he was approaching Parliament. The reporters stopped him. He started talking.
One last thing. If I just got one last thing. Today, the president and the prime minister will meet, and we want to wish Prime Minister Carney a positive meeting. We hope that the president will honor our sovereignty and signal an end to these tariffs. We think that there should be a deal as soon as possible to end the chaos.
And it is the only time in my memory I have ever heard Pierre Poilievre talk about the Liberal Party, and not Carney, but the Liberal Party in general, without accusing them of things, without blaming them for things, without, giving us grievances and talking about how horrible they are. He basically stated that he wished Carney the best, that these are really important negotiations, and that he's looking forward to getting these resolved as quickly as possible. It was a neutral statement. But for a guy who's an attack dog, it shows he's very consciously trying not to criticize what's going on right now. So, that's going on.
Yeah, he needs to get out of the way or support the changes as long as they're reasonable from his point of view. Otherwise, he's just going to be written off completely. The people of Carleton, we owe a big favor to the people of Carleton, Ottawa, Carleton, have humbled this man. And it's the people that knew him the best. And I still think it was that day that he rolled up and served donuts and coffee to the convoy and supported the convoy that may have helped him become conservative leader, but that's what lost him his seat in Ottawa, Carleton. And that's got to be a hugely humbling experience. We'll see how long that lasts for, right? His true instincts are to be the attack dog, but he's obviously been chastened.
I think a lot of Canadians are happy that there's not a majority. People I've talked to are content that we didn't go through a dramatic change of Poilievre and the populist movement coming in, but they didn't necessarily want a liberal majority either. They're kind of balanced. What they want is they want the politicians to stop fighting each other and start talking about issues and solving our problems. Now, that's a big problem for Poilievre because his whole definition of his brand is attack dog and, opposition leader. But what Canadians seem to really want is they want them to put it on pause. Let's look at the big picture. How do we help the economy? How do we fight tariffs? How do we fight Trump? How do we fight inflation? How do we fight unemployment? Housing crisis? Can't politicians work together? And we know they can't, but they have to have some cover looking like they're trying to. And I don't know if Poilievre is able to do that. It's going to be quite interesting to see.
That's a good point. To me, he made a tremendous journey from the point where he gave his so-called concession speech, which I'd like to get back to in a sec, to what you're describing now as a more chastened, humble approach. So I listened to that concession speech, and I heard what I thought was the first speech in the next campaign. First of all,
remember that Lonnie had not yet lost a seat at that point.
Yeah, but he knew it. He had lost his seat. It was that time. I watched the numbers very closely. There were only 2 polls left to report in Carleton. So, no, for sure. He didn't acknowledge it publicly, which was part of his scam at the time. So when he gave that concession speech, he was still the old Pierre Poilievre. And he did, and if you notice, like most politicians, when they win or lose, they get up and almost the first thing they do after they thank their own campaign manager and their family and so forth is they either offer congratulations to the winner or they offer congratulations to the loser for running a strong campaign and thanking them. It's sort of like just a polite way of doing it, but it's how it's done. And when Carney got up after Poilievre later to make his acceptance speech, that was very, very early in the speech.
He congratulated all the leaders, including specifically Poilievre.
He did. And guess what? People cheered.
Yeah.
At the Liberal meeting. Okay. So let me finish.
Yeah.
So Poilievre, in his speech, he waited until almost the end of the speech. And then he congratulated Carney in the first half of a sentence, for which the second half of the sentence was more of his campaign gobbledygook. And guess what people did in that Conservative Party? They booed the mention of Carney. So that, in a nutshell, is the old Poilievre and his followers in the Con Party. And between that and a few days later, when he woke up and got all this advice from people like you and other pundits and so forth, and from the people of Carleton, really it sunk in. He is hopefully a changed man, but we'll see how long that lasts. I cut you off there, so I apologize.
No, when I watched the leaders' speeches, first of all, I was really touched by Jagmeet Singh. I thought he did a wonderful speech, talked about the reality of what had happened that evening, thanked his workers, thanked the other party leaders. It was a really appropriate speech for the time. Carney came out and he nailed it. He addressed the seriousness of it. He talked about needing to work together, putting our differences aside. What he addressed, which is what you were getting at, is he basically said, I'm going to try to be the prime minister for all Canadians, no matter who you voted for. He used those words. Right. I've never heard Poilievre really speaking like that, saying, I want to represent even those people who are liberals, even those people who are NDP. He doesn't speak for them. He wants us all to become like him, or we're not his constituents. Well, he's not interested in that.
We listen to the rumors that he and his campaign manager treat the wet Tories the same way. They have no respect for the Doug. Well, you heard one guy on election night basically saying that Ford wasn't a true conservative and so forth. So I think that they learned that, you can keep your base happy. You even attract the more right-wing part of the spectrum, but you're not going to get, in the face of that, the rest of the country will come together under a single, champion and defeat you. And that's in fact what happened. So he's going to have to learn to, make a bigger tent, as they say, but that's not in his nature. That's not in his nature.
Yeah.
And I think that him going to Alberta and to run in a seat there is almost absurd when you think about it, because I remember when Tommy Douglas couldn't get a seat and he had to go out to BC to get a seat, and the faithful stuck with him because the NDP were never expected to really win, and it was a movement more than a party. And I remember when other leaders have had to run in a by-election, it's always when they're brand new leaders, not when they're 20 years into the job 2 years into the job as leader and 20 years into the job as an MP. So it's very telling, again, coming back to that point, that the people that knew him the best rejected him. So what's he done? He's pressured some MP in Alberta that nobody's heard of in the safest seat in the country.
It's an 80% conservative vote in their riding.
Right.
However,
he's now gone to a riding where they're in the middle of, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, the separatist movement is now rearing its head with the help of their premier. And so I think that PP might be in for a little surprise when if he still is open with reporters and they start nailing him on the separation question. What's he going to do? Is he going to piss off the rest of Canada and be ambiguous about Alberta separation? Or will he come out as a strong Captain Canada and alienate his supporters in Alberta? It's an interesting, point in Canadian politics that he's arrived at.
Another curiosity about his by-election is, number one, the fact that Carney basically said right away, I'm not going to play politics with this. We'll call it as soon as they're ready. That was really a magnanimous gesture on the part of Carney. If it gets because he doesn't know politics, he hasn't been in politics long enough.
Well,
but it was quite I think Canadians really accept that as a magnanimous move. I also note with curiosity that the longest ballot people are back, and they're claiming they want to have 200 candidates in that riding in the Battle River Crowfoot. They had 90 of them in Carleton. They're claiming they're going to have 200 in this one.
They did, and some of the conspiracy theorists were blaming that for Pierre's loss, but I figure if they can find their way to F on a long list of candidates, they can find their way to P as well. So I'm not a big fan of the long ballot committee, but sorry.
I just think it's going to be interesting if these people do what they're saying. This will be a very watched by-election, obviously, and having, once again, that 200 names on the ballot will add a comical aspect to it. It's not funny already.
Right. Well, it's a form of protest, and I actually would prefer PR to our present system, but we spend a lot of time agonizing about that rather than organizing in political parties. And, we have a system that can give us good results if we work it. It's not the best maybe, but and we could actually change the system too if we stuck our minds to it. But in the meantime, first past the post is what we've got. And I think Canadians stepped up to the plate under the circumstances and said, in this one, we've got to make sure we got the right guy in charge. And so I think the longest ballot committee, their intentions are good, but I don't like their tactics, personally.
I can see that. So what did you think of Mr. Carney goes to Washington yesterday? How did you read that?
Well, I was very impressed with his few minutes of performance in the Oval Office. I watched the whole Oval Office scene that they put together. I must say it's the longest time I've ever sat and listened to Trump. Could barely make it to the end of it.
I agree.
And I mean, in that 20 minutes or whatever it was, Carney maybe spoke all of 2 minutes, but his points were very salient, and they stopped Trump in his tracks. He used this great real estate analogy, and Trump nodding, saying, that's true. And then he gets to his, that's classic sales technique, as you probably remember from your sales training. That you get the customer agreeing with easy to ask questions. So, the White House isn't for sale. That's true. The Buckingham Palace isn't for sale. It's true. And Canada's not for sale. Right. What's he going to say? I just had a conversation with the owners. It's not for sale. So, I thought that was pretty masterful. And I thought that Trump then said something along the lines of, it takes two to tango.
He said that.
He followed that up with never say never, but that was a very weak
and when he said that, never say never, Carney immediately responded with, to the cameras, never. He just turned to the cameras and said, never. The media has been covering it, has really enjoyed focusing on the expressions on Carney's face.
Right.
His grins and his...
The most important thing was when he got out of Trump in that meeting, and he got out of Trump, it takes two to tango. That's an acknowledgement that we're not interested, and he better move on with other things. And so I have to, it was interesting that he referenced his dislike of Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. Trump did.
Yes.
I maintain, back in the day when Trump first was elected, he said wonderful things about Justin Trudeau. He said, everybody likes this guy. Apparently, according to the pundits, that's because he's in love with celebrity. And at the time, Justin Trudeau was a global celebrity, having just been elected and had a lot of global notoriety already. So Trump liked him. And then I maintain it was that picture, that photograph, when Melania Trump is staring up into Justin's eyes, and Justin's staring back, and they look enraptured with each other, and she never has a smiling picture that I can remember. So I think ever since that picture, that's when Trump really started to hate Justin, and it's bad luck for Canada, but it's one of those things, right?
One of the things that's become obvious about Trump is whether he likes or dislikes a person directly impacts how he deals with them.
Exactly.
Like, he does let his personal likes and dislikes stand in the way of all kinds of things. And it's just, we expect so much more out of seasoned businessmen, politicians. We just expect them to be able to, Carney is not a fan of Donald Trump's, but he sat there and did what he had to do.
Yep.
I know a lot of people thought he should go down there and just say, elbows up, go to hell, Trump, we want nothing to do with you. People were saying he shouldn't have even gone down there. I can understand that. But we have an economy to look after. We have a problem to be dealt with. And without his cooperation or working with Trump somehow, or around him somehow, we're not going to solve that problem. So I thought Carney did the right approach. He didn't concede anything. He went down, made her case clear. I don't think he's counting on a huge development of, Trump's going to give in and give it everything we want. But he did the steps that are necessary to work towards or to start resolving or clarifying the problem.
And he found a way to praise Trump to his face, which pumped Trump up. But we all knew they had double meanings, such as, you're a truly transformative president. Well, you can transform something into something good or something bad, but that was left unsaid.
Yeah, he picked those words very carefully, I think.
Oh, I think so, yeah. And, I think a lot of the time, one of the reasons Carney is quite impressive is that he may think about words ahead of time, but most of what comes out of his mouth is real time. He's not just going and saying, well, what are my 5 talking points here? How am I going to get past this question without really answering it? He stops and thinks and actually tries to answer the question. And it's kind of refreshing after all the politicians speak we've been listening to for so long.
I agree. I noticed that when he first announced that he was seeking leadership, when he did the Jon Stewart show, was it the interview?
Yes, that was
before. He just spoke openly, answered questions, did a good job of it. And yeah, when it comes to, and a lot of people have said this, how will he do in question period? He isn't a trained politician. He's a trained economist, a trained businessman, a professional. And I think that he's going to deal with things his way. And, we all saw that in the debate. Poilievre's a polished debater. He does it, with a passion. He loves doing it, okay? He loves getting his teeth into people and, chopping away. I don't know. I don't believe that's what we need in Canada right now. I feel far more confident with someone like Mark Carney, who has the integrity and the principles that I believe are necessary to solve complicated problems, and the intelligence and skill set. Well,
and he kept repeating on the campaign trail, I'm not a politician, and it was at that point still true. I mean, he's becoming a politician, but as you have a background in business, and by the way, folks, Nick had an amazing career as a business person. Now, someday we'll get into that, but that as a business person, you're not going to like everybody you meet. You're not even going to necessarily want to do a lot of the things that they might want to do, but you have to get along with people. And who's your enemy today could easily be your ally tomorrow.
Exactly.
And it's not personal. You want to do what's best for your company, your shareholders, or what have you. And so that's kind of the mindset that Carney is. I think that's what you're alluding to. And I think that he's already changed the tone in politics. If you in Canadian politics, and if your comments on Pierre were accurate at the beginning, that's some indication of it. So we'll see when these guys get back in, and they made Andrew Scheer now the interim leader, and is he going to be more respectful, or is he going to come in and start braying like a dog at the moon, like he has been in the past?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. Part of the problem we have is we have that same 35% that are radical populist in Canada as they have in the States. Like I'm pretty sure that. I mean, they did a year ago. They did the polls that showed how many people actually support Donald Trump and Trumpism in Canada, and there's a pretty significant 30-35%. Similar numbers. What they have.
I thought it was lower than that. I thought it was lower than that. You're right about the 35% being stuck on Pierre Poilievre, but is that congruous with the same number for Trump?
Yeah, the number of people who want to join the states is very low. That's like 12-13%. Okay.
All right, maybe that's right.
Who want to separate Alberta is quite low, but the number of people who preferred Trump over Harris was in the high 20s, low 30s in Canada, especially high amongst young men and young women.
Yeah.
Just as we talk about the generation, I find it interesting. Trump did extremely well in the States with our generation, with senior boomers. And here in Canada, Poilievre did very poorly with our generation. Interesting that across the border we reacted differently up here to the threat of populism than they did in the States.
Yeah. Well, considering we share so much of the electronic culture and so forth, it's amazing that Canada has maintained its own identity and its own way of doing things, and that's maybe a good marker for it. The fact that our generation here is a lot more wise, maybe, than the Americans. So I think Canadians are generally more global aware. I mean, we're aware that we're one player in a big world, whereas Americans often don't see beyond the border of their own state, let alone the borders of the USA.
And on the heels of this Canadian rejection of populism, Australia had an election this week or on the weekend. And that again turned out where they re-elected the incumbent government, the Labour government, against all odds. The polls did not predict that in the beginning of the campaign at all.
Another left of center victory based on fear of Donald Trump, I guess.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I think then the conservative leader, or the whatever they call him there, also loses his own seat personally.
Yes, he did. The Silmarils were amazing. Okay.
So that's a real that's telling there too as well. All these guys are just waiting in the wings, though.
Oh, that's true. We've got to remember something, okay? Trump lost in 2020. I was really disappointed at the time that he didn't get destroyed. I mean, Biden won, but just by, he got there. Same way, we have not yet expelled populism in Canada, said we want nothing to do with it. If Poilievre came in at 15% of the vote, then you could say, yes, Canada wants nothing to do with it. But those forces are there, and they're waiting to capitalize, to regroup, to look for the next issue, and to sell their snake oil any way they can. And it's something we've got to be vigilant of continually in Canada and Australia. And the States, I don't know what they're going to do. They've got a real challenge now trying to win back what they've lost.
Yeah. It's funny how the word populism has been now sort of locked in with the word right wing. It's almost like populism means, but there is, I think, such a thing as left wing populism as well. I'd say that maybe Bernie Sanders might be an example of that, and that is saying, because I believe populism is a rejection of the elite and trying to appeal to the common people, but it can be used, for good or bad. So,
agreed.
It's right-wing populism that we have to keep at bay here.
Yeah. I mean, Tommy Douglas was a famous populist. I mean, it was a populist movement, the socialist movement, the rising up of the NDP. I spent a lot of time in BC in the 1980s or 1990s. I dealt with Preston Manning, who was a right-wing populist. Actually, he came out of the social credit movement. If you want to talk crazy right-wing, social credit has it all over everybody out there. Okay. But it was about that time that the word populist started to be associated with the right. And I've been trying to use it recently because I hate talking about Trumpism. We overuse that whole Trump thing. And I don't know if I can define anymore what the right wing is. What is an extreme right winger? It's very difficult to do. There are some Republicans who still try to be free market, conservative, pro-business, pro-constitution conservatives. Now, they've lost any say in anything right now. Yeah. But the Trump movement, which I don't know what you call it, MAGA, but that doesn't apply universally. So I've been using the word populist, and you're right.
Yeah. I was just reflecting on how these words sort of change over time, and but the right wing is definitely a good way to describe it, but not conservative. Conservative implies somebody who just wants to preserve things and be careful with change. And that's why I always loved the label progressive conservative. It was such a lovely contradiction in terms, but it was pretty indicative when Stephen Harper made sure that the word progressive got pulled back out of the National Conservative name, and it was also an indication of where they were going. And so, how do you know much about the IDU, the International Democratic Union?
No, I don't. I've heard a lot about them, but just in passing. I haven't taken the time to research them properly.
They're an interesting organization because they have a name that sounds pretty good, International Democratic Union, but it's actually those right wingers, those right wing populists around the world. And Harper is the chairman, and Donald Trump's conservatives Donald Trump's Republicans are members of it. The guy in Hungary, Orban, his name is, Modi is a member, and Pierre Poilievre, gave a keynote speech at one of their things here. As we know, that Harper and Poilievre are very close. So it's an international organization that is basically working behind the scenes as much as possible to bring in right-wing governments and to suppress anything center or left. And it's been quite successful, but they just got defeated here in Canada. So, but they're not going to stop. And Stephen Harper, our former prime minister, he's the head of it. So I suggest we all look a little further into that, because that's one of those shadowy organizations that's behind a lot of the nonsense we've been dealing with in public life in the last while.
Yeah, that's where I've come across it. When the right wingers have thrown things out about the Great Left, WEF, the World Economic Forum conspiracy. Right. Anytime I've mentioned how the conservatives and Harper support it, people point out to me, no, they're now in the IDU. They've moved on to the IDU from the WEF. So that's how I heard it or come across it.
Right. Well, it's real and it's there. And, I think that it would be nice if the media in Canada had talked about it more, because I think that it could influence more people to be wary of the Conservative Party, which is part of an international. I mean, if you're allied with people like Modi and Orban and Trump, that's not the people that we want in charge of Canada. So and it's also giving Harper a nice perch for his retirement years. So he can fly around the world, and probably the Koch brothers pay for his flights, and is my guess. And he's a nice figurehead to keep people on the right side.
Yeah. Looking south and looking at the bigger picture of Donald Trump and his movement, I know that Donald Trump he's an old man. Donald Trump is, I don't know, even health-wise, when they talk about him running in the next election, I don't know if his health or he could die any day. Okay. And I don't mean that from a violent point of view. I just mean from natural health. He's an old man, and I think his health is deteriorating. So I think Donald Trump is going to pass at some point in the next year to 5 years. Who knows? Okay. But I don't think if Trump passing or disappearing from the scene is going to put the end, because he's empowered and enabled this movement behind him, the oligarchy. I mean, if you think about what Elon Musk is doing out there, he's regulating and taking control of institutions and agencies that regulate him, that give contract to him and his company. And that level of corruption is not just Elon Musk, it's widespread throughout his administration. I don't know how the U.S. is going to recover from where Trump has taken them. And he has taken them in this first 100 days a long way from where they were and from where they ever thought they were. And you know what? His approval rating is still 42% of Americans still approve of him today, of what he's doing and how he's gotten here.
Yeah. Well, I guess the big test will be when he openly defies the court system, and then if nobody actually makes him pay for that, then he will have suborned the court system, and that's the last pillar. So I'm of two minds. One is that Trump is an unusual figure, that he's like a boil. If we lance the boil, we'll be able to move on. He's so outrageous, but people, I mean, he spouts nonsense, and people still just stay with him. So, if he died tomorrow and Vance took over, I think Vance would have a much harder time getting away with this stuff than Donald Trump is. So, I'm of two minds. One is, they've taken us so far down the road that it's Nazi Germany. On the other hand, or it's heading that way. And on the other hand, when he goes, I think, it could be like people wake up from a nightmare and go, "How did I do that?" I don't know if you have. I've reflected at times from my youth, thinking, "Why did I do that? I was pretty stupid." And I think that there might be a collective version of that once Trump is gone. Let's hope so.
Well, while the vast numbers haven't changed in popularity, you're seeing that with some of the content influencers, Joe Rogan and others. They're actually starting to look at what they said and what they did a year ago and realizing we got took, we got played. Yeah. And these are people who don't get played often, but they did.
Yeah, exactly. Well, of course, you can't evade reality forever in terms of this economic collapse that he's bringing on, and it could surprise us all and pull a rabbit out of the hat and make the economy great. But chances are that's not what's going to happen. That there's going to be some real economic hardship in both the U.S. and
in the near future.
We haven't really seen the true effects of this stuff. Trump went on. He's dropped the 2028 stuff. He realized that that's not going to go anywhere. So it's sort of disappeared from the lexicon. But I saw clips of him talking to reporters about dolls and how he could have $5 and not $25. But he went back. He went on and on, and he went back. And then later, another clip when he was on the plane, he got back into it, and it's like, a really old man who's got a dog on a bone, and he can't seem to get past that. And I think you're right. I think they're starting to wonder what they bought themselves. But they, on the other hand, they can't. As soon as they give up, then they've got to admit so much. They got to stick with them.
Yeah, I think his actions have been so extreme. What he's done, I think the consequences are going to come within months. The market basically has recovered some because they think he's going to back down, but I don't think he's going to. I think that the consequences of the tariffs, of his trade policy with China, the reality of what that means to the American economy, to the car industry, to the energy industry, it's going to come home in the next couple of months. I think
we're late.
You're unfortunately going to have a lot of pain here in Canada along with it. But that's going to basically be the breaking point when America is going to basically have to shelve Trump and move on. And that's when we'll see if anybody stands up to oppose him. Because I think the support level will drastically drop at that time.
Yeah, when people can't eat and pay rent, and the problem is, if the propaganda machine is in full gear, they may continue to blame that on immigrants instead of on billionaires. I think that there's a word. Sorry, I was trying to get out a minute ago, called latency, and I think if Trump was to drop all the tariffs today and say, "Oh, I was wrong," people are the bad effects of what he's done is still going to happen because they haven't happened yet because of latency. It takes some time for these things to take effect, but the things are in motion. I mean, and it's going to take the United States, assuming that Trump reverses this or that he gets kicked out and somebody else tries to reverse it, it's going to take them a long time, if ever, to get back to that sweet spot that they were in, which is that everybody trusts the American economy, everybody trusts the American dollar, and everybody trusts that American defense will either come and wipe them off the map or protect them, one or the other. And those assumptions have all been thrown out the window at this point in time. And it's going to take a long time for that particular narrative to be resurrected if it's possible even. So the Chinese must be giggling right now. I mean, it's not good for them either, but the rest of us are kind of giggling at Trump. But he's just he just had so many self goals at this point in time that it could almost be funny if it wasn't so tragic.
Yeah. Yeah. And there in the States, I want to make a note here for you, for everybody, June 14th. That's Trump's birthday when he has a big military parade. And that is what's it called? No Kings. They named the protests in hundreds of sites around the USA called No Kings. And they have several groups and organizations. And I'm really curious to see how that day turns out. Because you know what? Since Trump got elected in 2015 and it started in 2016, he's wanted a parade. He wanted a military parade. And this year he has mandated to the military, bring me a parade. I want tanks. I want fighter jets. And they've agreed. They're going to give him 2 battalions of tanks, apparently. So the resistance of the states
is reminiscent of the Soviet Union
of that day to rise up and, make that known.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of the Soviet Union. I mean, we all remember the Red Square parades, and they trot out all of their hardware and their uniforms and so forth. And that's Trump. He just wants to have that same sense of power and pomp and ceremony.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for watching today. If you enjoyed this content, please like the video, leave your comments, and subscribe to the channel. Here are a few other videos you might enjoy. Have a great week.